say in all of this process, all of the struggles, all of the suffering, Schopenhauer says there's no aim or goal in all of this. There's no purpose to history. Remember, Hegel told us that there was a historical process and that there was a purpose to history, that it unfolded in a certain way, and that mankind was moving toward a type of golden age. Schopenhauer says no. There is no purpose to history. There is no purpose to our lives. Existence, our lives, is fleeting and vain. Fleeting means brief, and vain means having no real value. Our desires are never satisfied. Our questions are never answered. And there's more suffering and pain in our lives than pleasure. Life is like a losing business to Schopenhauer. A losing business is when the business is putting out more money than it takes in, and it will eventually go broke. That's the way our lives are. There is more suffering in our lives and frustration than there is happiness and pleasure. I'll read another passage here. All that these remarks are intended to make clear, namely the impossibility of attaining lasting satisfaction and the negative nature of all happiness, finds its explanation in what is shown at the end of the second book, namely that the will, whose objectification in human life, like every phenomenon, is a striving without aim or end. There is no purpose, there is no goal. Our situation is bad, Schopenhauer says. He says the best thing, now you want a happy thought here? The best thing that could have ever happened to us is to have never been born. Well, what help or what remedy is there then for this? If the situation is that bleak and our lives are consumed by suffering, then would not suicide be a viable option? Would that not be something that would be preferable for us to do? Schopenhauer says that doesn't work either. We're part of this universe. Everything is a manifestation of the will. We can't go out of existence. We'll merely come back as some other manifestation. So he believes in a type of reincarnation. We would just come back into this world and will be part of this miserable process again. Well, what about the philosophical approach? Philosophy as a guide to living has always promised deliverance from the human predicament, suffering, ignorance, etc. Look back at Plato's advice, standard philosophical answer. Order your soul. Listen to or practice the dictates of reason. In the philosophical approach, reason is our deliverance. There is great faith in the rational faculty, but Schopenhauer says this doesn't work either. He sees reason as merely instrumental. Here, that means it's just an instrument that the will uses to get what it wants or to avoid what is unpleasant or threatening. Reason is controlled by the will. It does not control the will. At the core of our being is something non-rational that controls us, and reason cannot change this reality. Is there any way then to minimize or to escape the destructive ravages of the will? Schopenhauer actually says yes. And we've got up here, I've got 3 ways he says that we could minimize the negative effects of the will. The first one is aesthetic contemplation. When we're engaged in our everyday activities, we move in the world of appearances, what he called the world of representation. In this normal state, we are controlled by the will, which is the source of our suffering. If we could move beyond this world of appearances, we would be beyond the control of the will. Schopenhauer makes a very significant claim that when we're engaged in aesthetic contemplation, that means when we're under the spell of a work of art, we are no longer controlled by the will, and there's a type of peace, and this is a pleasurable feeling. Let me see if I can find this in my book. Yes, okay. All right. He says, when an aesthetic perception occurs, again, when we're under the spell of a work of art, the will completely vanishes from consciousness, but will is the sole source of all our troubles and sufferings. This is the origin of feeling of pleasure, which accompanies the perception of the beautiful. This is why we take pleasure in art. And now let me explain this claim if I can. Schopenhauer said that Plato had a valid insight with his idea of the forms or ideas, that there are patterns or universals that lie beyond the world of appearances. This is how the will works. Artistic genius, Schopenhauer suggests, perceives these universals, the forms of the ideas, and can represent them artistically. So when we contemplate an aesthetic achievement, we are transported beyond the world of mere representation, and we see the universal. We see that which is unchanging. Let me read one more here. This is why a painting, by fixing forever the fleeting moment and thus extracting it from time, presents not the individual but the idea, the enduring element in all change. Art can show us the universal, and that takes us beyond the reach of the will. We're temporarily free from the pull of the will. And this is why Schopenhauer claims we derive pleasure from art, from artistic genius and aesthetic appreciation. He calls this an extremely significant activity. Then all at once, the peace, always sought but always escaping us on that first path of willing, comes to us of its own accord. Again, this is when we are under the spell of a work of art. And all is well with us. It is the painless state prized by Epicurus as the highest good and the state of the gods. For that moment, we're delivered from the miserable pressure of the will. And now Schopenhauer has a good deal to say about art, and he's pretty influential with this. But he claims that music is the highest, purest form of art. Music is a universal language. It circumvents the intellect and speaks directly to our emotions. Music has the power to raise desires in us and bring them to a type of closure and satisfaction. And he claims that music has a therapeutic effect on us. That means it is healthy, it produces health. The great German composer, 19th century composer, Richard Wagner, had read Schopenhauer and was captivated by his ideas. And he believed that Schopenhauer was right about music. Schopenhauer has the highest regard for the world of art. It is a highly significant activity, and Schopenhauer is widely read and admired by many of the major artists of the 20th and 21st century. A second way we can minimize the effects of the will is to cultivate sympathy for our fellow human beings and animals as well. Schopenhauer was an animal lover. Everyone is a manifestation of the will. Everyone suffers the same agonies as all others. This knowledge should generate a type of universal compassion. We feel compassion for all living things because everyone suffers. And this universal compassion may engender a type of quietism, a non-competitive quietism that lessens the will's power. And third, the best but the most challenging strategy is the ascetic life. Ascetic means self-denial, the life of self-denial. If we could diminish desire, root it out, gradually lose the desire to live, we could reach a condition of peace, and we would be beyond the reach of the will. We're no longer part of the process of willing, and this is a little close to the Buddhist conception of nirvana, if you're familiar at all with what that is.